Hey there, this is Dan and you're watching The Salty Sea. I'm a little under the weather today, but no time for self-pity because I'm excited to bring you the starter list for every warband order video. This is the fifth and final in the series. This series has been a labor of love for me, so I'm really excited to be finishing it and showing it to you all. So I just want to run through a few quick notes here. Um, the first being that, as the other videos, we're going to do one budget, one competitive, and one sort of sweet casual list for each of these factions. Now, as far as creating some of the competitive lists, um, there is a sort of, like when I did the Chaos video, the Contorted Epitome is sort of a giant purple elephant in the room, sort of looming over that whole Grand Alliance book. Order has something similar that just happened for, the Lumineth Realmlords release, which dropped the points of a whole bunch of Lumineth pieces and also introduced a whole bunch of new ones. Really great for what it portends for the future of Warcry. I'll probably do a video on that, in the future a little bit here, but for now, it's sort of full of a lot of typos, a lot of, weapon profiles have the wrong little picture indicator, and then some of the points were dropped to a point that I almost think could be a mistake, and the High Sentinel is one of them. It dropped down to 95 points, which is much lower than any other leader for any other faction in the game, and it allows you to ally in something with a double ability that's more powerful than Onslaught, and then you're also getting about 120 points worth of fighter for 95 points. So at a certain point, if you're getting really competitive with Warcry, it's, the game doesn't revolve around a High Sentinel when you have one, unlike, say, a Contorted Epitome in Chaos, which when that hits the board, the whole game revolves around what the Contorted is doing. High Sentinels instead, it just gives you so much value for a low cost that, in some ways, if you can fit it into your list, you'd be crazy not to. Now, I'm not going to add it into any lists that aren't really happy to have it, both for its capabilities and the ability itself. But just noting that that's there, I still think it's probably a mistake, but who knows. Another quick note is one cool thing with Order is that because of Tempest's Eye, the city of the cities of Sigmar city, move 3 doesn't have to be quite the death sentence that it is in the other Grand Alliances, so you'll see me add in Tempest's Eye units pretty often. And then another piece, the Bloodrack Medusa, is just a really heavy hitter that you could put into a lot of lists. I've chosen not to. It usually actually wouldn't fit, but just a quick note there. Then after this video, sometime in the future, I'm going to actually go in and rank all of the lists that I had for all 5 of these videos to, play around a little bit, create maybe a bit of a tier list. I know that's Rito's thing. Maybe it'll be a fun little debate discussion to have. And part of that's just because I don't know when, if ever, we'll ever have like a competitive scene. I would like to eventually be tiering things while weighting tournament results more highly than any kind of theory crafting. Though, it's hard to say when we're sort of making all these lists in hopes of playing in person one day, and how much does that sort of stifle creativity once we actually get there? How much doesn't it? Who knows? But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Finally, I do want to just thank the Reddit user Moskanet for creating a compendium of all of the Warcry stats. Really easy to search through. It's just a big PDF. I used it a ton while making these videos, and so I can't thank you enough. And let's get into it. All right. So our first faction is going to be Cities of Sigmar. And one of the really exciting things about cities is that you can just have so many different options for building on a budget. So for this budget list, I would say getting a box of Free Guild and then a Free Guild General. Together, that's only $45, so that's cheaper than even most of the Warcry boxes. And the cool thing about Free Guild is that you get multiple different weapon options for them. So you can build something like this list where you have a free guild general, a guild champion who is, the boss of a free guild box, and then 2 handgunners, spears, halberds. I like spears a little bit better than halberds, but I do think you want a mix there. And so this gives you just a wide variety of weapon options, a ton of stuff you can do. You can put it into any city and do pretty well with it because you just have so many numbers here. Was that 11 different fighters to use? If you're going to get into competitive with Cities of Sigmar, if you're just playing to win, not that that's a bad thing, the Assassin is probably your most aggressively pointed leader, and its ability to kind of move around the board and put out a lot of damage is really useful. And then you're going to want to be in Tempest's Eye. So all of the cities, I'll just get this out of the way now, what differentiates them is that they have a universal double and then they have a leader triple. So the universal double for Tempest's Eye is called Outriders of the Realms, and it gives you a bonus move action. And then the leader triple is Swift as the Wind, and it gives the value of the ability added to the move of everything within 6 inches of the fighter using the ability. So it's really incredible because if you start off with a double and a triple, or in later rounds, you can put movement abilities on multiple places and for huge amounts as well. So the way I would play this is having your assassin in a deployment group with a lot of your free guild guard, who are point for point just a really incredible unit when they have the spears. The only drawback, although it's barely one, is that they have move 4, right? So then you boost their movement with the 6-inch Swift as the Wind, and then your chaff unit for the rest of your warband is going to be the Black Ark Corsair with the blade and cutlass. I would actually say in a vacuum that piece is better than the Free Guild Guard because it has the move 5. It can sort of gum up the board in a lot more flexible ways than the Free Guild Guard can, but you don't need it as much with Tempest's Eye, right? So I would put it in the deployment groups that don't have your general. And then a Wildwood Ranger is just a really good glass cannon, just for dealing damage. And then the Dark Shard, it's not doing a lot of damage from range, but just having something that you can put into your hammer, which is generally going to start off the board, that can still affect the fight without having to just slog towards people the whole game. Wild Rider is the same. Having one pretty fast, pretty damagey unit is going to be really useful here. And as far as a sweet casual list goes, whoopsies, had the Hallowheart, an old Hallowheart list title there. So Devoted of the Phoenix, right? So the Phoenicium has some really cool options when you have lots of glass cannon units, because you can get, for just a double, a total bonus attack action for one of your sort of hard-hitting leaders if one of your glass cannon units has died already. So Flagellants, I thought, were a really flavorful choice as far as a unit that would be happy to die so that its leaders could get an extra attack in. And then Wildwood Rangers, because they are these glass cannon pieces, they're really good for getting their value in. They are going to trade with whatever they're taking down, so you can sort of be very aggressive with them, take something down, and then they are going to die, but that's okay because the Anointed and the Wild Hunter are just great options to have for as far as pieces to get bonus attacks on. That being because, the Anointed with the range 2 or the Wild Hunter with the sort of really good movement, both of them can make sure that that extra attack isn't getting wasted. Finally, a Shadow Warrior to round out the list, having the option between melee and range is always nice. So now we get on to Daughters of Khaine, and this one is, and this is going to be true of a lot of the newer Order armies. This one's kind of hard to get into on a budget, but they do have a Start Collecting that does make a functional warband. So I would start with that one. The Slaughter Queen is a really good high damage piece, and then Blood Sisters are just really solid mid-tier fighting units for 165 points per. They have great movement 7, and then they they hit above their weight class pretty well. They can go toe to toe with a lot of units in the kind of 170, 180 range. If you're going competitive though, I would still keep a Bloodthester, but then I would move to the Bloodrack Medusa, which luckily also does come in that Star Collecting box. The Bloodrack Medusa is an incredible unit because, and I put it on my top 8 heavyweights list that I'll link. But what makes the Bloodrack Medusa so powerful is that you have very respectable damage coming out from 2-inch range, first of all. So 2-inch range so much better when you're pumping out real damage, because then that makes it so they can't ignore you and just leave. They really want to try to take you out, but the Bloodrack Medusa is both hard to kill and can deal a lot of damage, can often kill chaff units in one hit, which I always value very highly. But then it has an incredible ability called Bloodrack Stare, which gives it, I think, an 88% chance to root a unit in place. And, that unit can still attack, but with your 2-inch reach, you can go up onto their general, their most valuable piece, attack it, root it in place, and then it can't really do anything this round because it's not within range of you because you're attacking from 2 inches, and then just rinse and repeat next round. So think of it almost like a contorted epitome that still fights, right? It's almost as powerful as that unit. It's really incredible. And then you're going to want to fill the rest of it out. A Blood Sister to be another hard-hitting unit and a somewhat mobile, tough-to-kill unit for those missions where your primary deployment group doesn't matter the most. And then the Sister of Slaughter with Whip and Knife is one of the most powerful chaff units in the game. At 75 points, I guess it's a little bit more expensive than your average chaff unit, but it just does so much. It has a identical war scroll actually to the Kabbalist with Spear coming out of Corvus Cabal, which is also one of the higher tier warbands in the game. It's just an incredible piece. You absolutely want 6 of them here. And then the funny thing about Witch Elves is that in a lot of other factions, this would be your premier chaff piece that you absolutely write home to tell mom about. Most factions would kill to have Witch Elves as part of their roster, but here I'm only including 2 because it rounds out the points a little bit better than going all Sisters of Slaughter. So if you don't have Sisters of Slaughter, you can absolutely rely on Witch Elves for your Daughters of Khaine lists. They're a little weaker, but they're still an amazing unit. And so then, as a whole, I really love how Daughters of Khaine, when you're playing them competitively, it gives you all these sort of fast, really killy options, and then the one piece of disruption that you need to throw your opponent off, onto the back foot so that you can just continue chopping them up. Just a really sort of intense, pedal to the metal, but rewarding of skill warband. Then if you're going to go to playing more casually, one of the sad things about Daughters of Khaine is that the Khaine, the non-leader versions, are just so bad. But the leaders are actually kind of nice. So normally the problem is, for just 10 HP on units that cost more than 150 points, they just fall apart so quickly, even though they have great movement. It's just really hard to use them effectively. But the leaders, the Shrike and the Harridan, both kind of get around that, and they both have a lot of utility. The Shrike being able to, move around and do respectable damage with that 8-inch spear throw, and then the Harridan actually being a pretty real damage piece that is not quite as fragile as its sort of hand-to-hand combat Khaine minions. You can absolutely leverage those 2 units to have a lot of fun with them. And then, like any Daughters of Khaine list, I would suggest filling it out with Sisters of Slaughter, but, be my guest, do anything you want. Just don't cry to me if, you're not pleased with how the rank and file Khaine work. But you can do a lot of flying around and having fun with a Daughters of Khaine list. All right, so now we get to Fyreslayers. And the best way to run them on a budget, I think, is to grab the Underworld's warband, the Chosen Axes, and then a box of Hearthguard. That's going to be a little bit cheaper than the Start Collecting box and give you, you know, all of the tools you need for a pretty functional, solid Fyreslayers warband. So your Fuel Grimnir, the leader of the Chosen Axes, he has this huge ranged axe, so I think he's best run as an Auric Runefather. Um, and then you can also get your Hearthguard Berserker Carl. The Carl is, I think, probably the best leader unit that Fyreslayers have access to. And then 3 Volkites with 2 weapons. For my money, those are actually the best rank and file troops that you can get. And then a Hearthguard Berserker with Broadaxe for a little bit more elite punch. And then 2 Auric Hearthguard. I really love their ability to encase and rock. Just really useful to have just access to 1 or 2 of that somewhere on the board when you're playing them. So that kind of snowballs into what a competitive list would look like, right? So at the top of the show, I mentioned that move 3 is not the death sentence in order that it is in, a lot of other warbands, or sorry, a lot of other Grand Alliances, because the Tempest's Eye, people can add more than just 1 movement, right? So if you're in Chaos and you have move 3, Sloppity Bilepiper can only get +1 to you. But the same is not true. So in order, so Tempest's Eye Runelord can add a whole bunch to your movement and then also pump up one of your attackers later on. So that makes the Hearthguard Berserker Carl with the Runelord a really good start to a more competitive Fyreslayers force. And then just again, 6 Volkite with 2 weapons. Not much to say there. They're the best sort of damage per point option that you've got here. And then 1 Auric Hearthguard because, again, I just love that encase and rock ability, and just having the option to use it if you don't want to be using your Tempest's Eye abilities is just really nice. The other thing I love about this is that the Runelord, being a dwarf means that you can include him in your list, and depending on how you paint him, he's not going to look out of place at all, which I think is just, it's really hard to sometimes bring in a competitive ally and then actually have it work for narrative reasons, so I like that. Now, because Fyreslayers are considered one of the lowest tier warbands, I chose to make a second competitive list here instead of just kind of a casual list, just under the assumption that, Fyreslayers, most lists you're going to make are somewhat casual anyway, so let's just try to maximize them. The Grimwrath Berserker is a really interesting piece that is, I would say, in a vacuum, I don't like it quite as much as the Hearthguard Berserker Carl, but can be really nice in conjunction with a High Sentinel. Now, this is one list where I actually think you would still consider the High Sentinel even at its original points cost, because the ability to give the Grimwrath Berserker extra attacks is really nice. So say you use the High Sentinel double from across the board onto whatever your Grimwrath is going to attack, and then you bring in your Grimwrath and you onslaught. So then for the cost of 2 doubles, you're going up to 5 attacks on your Berserker instead of just 3. And so that actually puts out a ton of damage, which can be used to assassinate leaders really nicely. Then you've got your, again, Volkite with 2 weapons. I think having an extra Auric Hearthguard is really nice here because you want to freeze things in place so that your Berserker can get onto it. And then your Hearthguard Berserker with Broadaxe is a really nice piece just for sort of a backup strategy where you'd use your High Sentinel with it in case your Grimwrath Berserker fell, or in case it's fighting something where it doesn't need the extra attack. You'll have another really good target for that ability just in your warband. And then you also have the Relentless Zeal ability out of Fyreslayers, where you add 3 to the move characteristic. It's a really nice thing. It's, again, not enough that I wouldn't suggest adding a Tempest's Eye Runelord, because it only hits 1 guy, but this competitive list is more about just choosing one really important fighter, pumping up its attacks, potentially pumping up its movement to get it where it needs to go, and then hitting really hard once you get there. So that's why I would include, the second hard hitter and then also the High Sentinel to boost it up. So now on to Idoneth Deepkin, and a cool thing about Idoneth is that the budget list is the competitive list. I've been trying with these videos to find sort of really solid budget lists that are cheaper than a start collecting box, but here I wouldn't suggest that because the start collecting box is just such a good entry point for the faction. And it's actually been really rare that they do this recently for GW, right? Because the Idoneth Deepkin are a fairly recent new army. And so usually the start collecting boxes are a little bit shady for those. The Daughters of Khaine one doesn't really start you up on a Daughters of Khaine warband. It just has, that giant knife carriage that I guess you do use for competitive AOS, but obviously you don't want for this game. So the Idoneth warband absolutely gives you every option you could ever want for building a competitive Idoneth list, or just a whole bunch of options for more casual lists too. So the way I would build them competitively is with an Ishlian Prince, one Ishlian Guard, a Thrall Icon Bearer, and 5 Namarti Thralls. So the play pattern for Idoneth Deepkin is to actually, so you have this Namarti Thrall, and it was on my list for top middleweight units at 80 points, and it's a really incredible glass cannon piece. But it's a little more expensive than you usually like your glass cannons to be, because if one dies, it really does hurt at 80 points. And so you want your Ishlian Prince and Ishlian Guard to be moving forward really aggressively to use their biovoltaic barrier ability, so that your opponent's ability to just kill your fighters is just wildly reduced. And then that's when, in the third battle round, hopefully right at the start, you're able to explode with the High Tide ability for just a ton of damage in the late game to finish off your opponent. So it's really the ultimate combo faction, and I think building it this way is your best way to do that. It's really tempting while theory crafting to cut the Ishlian Guard and just try to shove as many Namarti Thralls into your list as possible, because that's what gets pumped up the most by High Tide, and they're also just point for point your best damage dealers. And then your Ishlian Prince can just do the dirty work of setting up High Tide for you and being your barrier. But one of the pitfalls there is that you don't get access to your shield right in the thick of things in every battle, right? So you can get too carried away with math hammering with Warcry if you don't remember sort of the way deployments work. So I do think you want 2 Ishlians, and then just, as many Namartis as you can get. The Thrall Icon Bearer is just because the math doesn't work out to put 2 more Namartis in here, so having one of your Namarti Thralls just be a really hard-hitting one is kind of nice. However, that's not the only way to play Idoneth Deepkin, which I think is really exciting. So you can also play them as sort of a control list, which is really cool. So the Soul Render and the Isharan Tidecaster both have some really nice disruption abilities. So the Tidecaster has Riptide, where you can subtract 1 from the attack's characteristics of a fighter within 12 inches. And then the Soul Render has Hangman's Knot, which on a 3-up can freeze, no move, no disengage, so net an opponent. And then the the Soul Render is actually also just a pretty respectable fighter in his own right, and he can kind of do the thing that that Bloodrack Medusas do, as far as setting up 2 inches away and then throwing down his ability, his disruption ability. So that can give you a really interesting sort of completely different playstyle to the competitive sort of Ishlian Guard force. A little similar in some ways, right? Because you're still going to want to be disrupting your opponent early and then exploding for damage late, but you're just doing it in a totally different way that can be really rewarding if you've just played the main list a ton of times. So Kharadron Overlords, kind of a fun one because they don't actually have that many different types of troops, but the sheer number of weapon options just ends up giving them more options than just about any warband. So you can still get the Warcry starter box for these online if you look around. So that's where I would suggest starting off with your KO. The Skywarden Custodian is a really nice flying piece with options to do kind of an underwhelming ranged attack or a really nice range 2 attack. And then adding in a Skywarden with the drill launcher. I think the drill launcher is probably the most versatile weapon option for the flying guys. I actually do prefer Endrin Riggers pretty extremely as far as, Skywarden versus Endrin Rigger, but just because I don't think that that ability is really worth extra points for. However, in this list, the points fit, so why not use a Skywarden? Then you also get Thunderers in the Warcry starter box, and the Grunstock Mortar is really nice. And then, I would suggest actually just running 4 different ones, just to get kind of your sense of which ones you like best, as far as, if you're just starting out this warband. Then if you're going to get competitive, I would keep the Custodian, but then I would mostly rely on Arcanauts, actually. So the funny thing about the competitive list is that it actually doesn't really play the way the rest of the options for KO would play, right? So the Arcanaut Sky Pikes, now these are the ones with an Arcanaut company box comes with one guy who gets just a melee spear, which isn't very KO, but they did end up pointing it so that it's legitimately one of the best units in the game, at least among move 3 that's just out there, right? So it's got the range 2, which helps mitigate slightly its slowness, and then it just does a mind-blowing amount of damage, especially to other chaff units, right? So it's, the damage does fall off pretty quickly against higher toughness units, but that doesn't really matter because you're just tearing up, toughness 3 models, which, in competitive is the main part of the meta. So then running 4 of those, it's hard to run a ton because they are 80 points each. Running 4 of those with then 2 of the basic 65-point pistol guys, and then the Arco with volley gun is also just a really nice, 6 attacks, even though they're 1/3, is just weight of dice is really good with that unit. So having one of them is really good. And then 1 Rune Lord. For all the reasons I said, Rune Lords are great in Fyreslayers. They're great here too. Accelerating your Sky Pikes to help them give you control of the game. Again, this list plays really differently than any other KO list, but it does sort of rely on the most powerful unit in the faction, which is the Sky Pike. So even if that's a little off flavor, it's still a really solid way to run it. So as far as a sweet casual list, let's go sort of more into how KO are supposed to play. And that's really leveraging this fight for profitability, which I actually really love. So until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of attack actions made by friendly fighters while they are within 6 inches of this fighter. If this fighter is carrying treasure or within 3 inches of an objective, add 2 to the attack's characteristic instead. So this really rewards having a fast leader, and then one where extra attacks really matter, right? Because your leader is a friendly fighter. It's visible friendly fighters that don't count the leader according to the FAQ, but just regular friendly fighter counts the leader. So your Endrin Master has a ranged attack that has a lot of damage for each hit, but only 2 attacks, right? So it really benefits from having +2 to attacks, and there's nothing in Fight for Profit that says that it has to be melee attacks, which most of these abilities have. So then I've loaded up this list with a bunch of other really high damage but low attack options that get huge benefit out of the Fight for Profit ability if you're getting to that 2 attacks, but still are just really solid pieces if you're getting 1. So we're looking specifically at the Grunstock Mortar, the Aether Cannon, and the Skyhook that all just really pump out huge damage if you're pumping their attacks characteristic. And they normally can't do that with Onslaught, right? Because Onslaught doesn't hit ranged attacks. Then your Arcanaut with Volley Gun doesn't get that huge benefit, right? It's already got 6 attacks, but that's good because you have something that's still solid and independently of the ability, and then an Arcanaut company to round out the list. So this is only 6 pieces, but each of them does a ton of work, and you can just absolutely blow opponents off the board with it. Just note also that, another thing you can do with KO is just spam a whole bunch of Arcanaut Company with their little range 8 pistols. You'll absolutely blow off the board anything that gets within range of you, but the short 8-inch range can make it kind of difficult to make that work compared to, say, Skink Spam, which Skink's cost is essentially the same concept, but a slightly more flexible unit doing it. So I didn't want to include the sort of all pistol spam, just because I think it's a worse version of another competitive list. All right, so the faction of the hour, Lumineth Realmlords. So they had this massive new update, which I'm incredibly glad that I saved order for last. Now, you're still not going to be able to do a budget version of LRL. I'm sorry, I didn't even bother to make a list here because it just can't be done. However, the way I would suggest doing it is just your 2 favorite infantry, just get 1 box of each and have at it, right? Venari Wardens are really good. Alaris Stone Guard are really good. Venari Blade Lords are really good. So I would just get 1 box of one that you like and another box of another one that you like and go for it. Now, if you're going competitively, I do think that of those 3 infantry options, the Venari Blade Lords are they're better in more situations than the other ones. They do really incredible damage for just 95 points each. They're one of those rare sort of mid-sized units that is absolutely worth what they're doing. And then the move 5 is, just a really nice bit of utility to have at all times. And then here we're just going to assume that the High Sentinel is, pointed correctly because we're in its own faction, why not? So the Venari Lord Regent is a really powerful sort of mounted beast of a new unit that gets a ton of burst damage potential when you're combining it with the High Sentinel. So, and then you can sort of export that damage anywhere on the board because your Venari Regent, yes, it has the mount keyword, but it's got move 10. So while there are other competitive ways to run this, specifically using just the Blade Lord leader with a High Sentinel to have less points devoted to your leader, but then more to troops, and then you can fit in 2 of the mounted units. I actually prefer just having the ability to project this huge burst damage explosion almost anywhere on the board that you want, and then that really constrains how your opponent can play the game. They can't just sort of commit their most important unit early on in the round, which is really helpful for you, right? Because then, you kind of get to dictate the terms of where things get placed on the board if you've got this option. The other competitive list that I'm going to put up here is also really solid. So if you're more of a believer in that, use that. It's really close and it's absolutely not solved. I just prefer this sort of burst damage version here that I've listed. If you are going to go into sort of a more casual attack at Lumineth Realmlords, I do want to note that Alaris Stone Guard are actually really incredible. Again, most people just dismiss units out of hand as soon as they see movement 3, and I don't think that's fair in the order book. In fact, there is a bit of a give and take where Alaris Stone Guard actually kind of wipe the floor with Blade Lords specifically, just because they can one-hit kill Blade Lords. Blade Lords can also one-hit kill Blade Lords, but Blade Lords can't one-hit kill the Stone Guard because of the extra point of toughness, and then so you have to be an incredible player to dance around the sort of move 3, range 2 of all the Stone Guards when you're just always at risk of being one-shot killed if you get into any kind of fight. And then so the any kind of Tempest Eye leader to sort of boost the movement of Stone Guards in just one deployment group is going to give you just an incredible piece that can then, once they get into position wherever you need them on the board, they can just mow things down because they've got the same attack profile that the Blade Lord does, except they're a little tougher, and they've also got the classic Shining Company rule that is really useful. Then also Venari Wardens really help you sort of pump up the numbers that you've got here. They're a little cheaper than Blade Lords and Stone Guards, and the move 5 range 3 on them gives them a ton of utility. I would actually say that this quote unquote sweet casual list, it's got a little bit more going on, right, than the competitive list is just one attack combo and then a bunch of just really solid, really flexible units. This list, it's kind of fun and silly, but it's only like one notch below the 2 competitive lists I showed here. So I think it's really worth running if you do like the hammer guys. I know most people don't like them. And then also just to note the Diamond Hammer being different than what's shown on the box. There are enough in the box to give to everyone that you buy, but it's just not the big stone mallet that's on the box. I don't think the mallets are good. In fact, I would say the stone mallets are terrible, but the Diamond Hammer ones are really good. All right, Seraphon, and one of the scariest warbands in the game, actually. So getting into them on a budget, there are sort of some cheap options as far as just getting one box warbands out of Seraphon, but I actually think that the Start Collecting Skinks box is a really good deal, especially if well, it's a great deal if you are interested in Age of Sigmar, but it's also a great deal if you're not and you're willing to sell the Bastiladon, right? Bulbasaurs go for a pretty penny on eBay. So if you pick that up and sell the Bastiladon, yeah, you spent $90, but you're actually going to get most of it back when you sell sort of the big centerpiece model that comes with it. And then you've actually got a really solid warband once you do. A Ripperdactyl Leader and a Pterodon Bolus Rider are they're a little fragile to use in competitive play in my opinion, but they are just really great for running around the board, getting to any spot that you want. And then the Ripperdactyl Leader does pretty respectable damage too. And then of course this box gives you a bunch of skinks, right? So 6 skinks with blowpipes here, and then 3 skinks with club and shield. It should say 3 there, it says 1. Just give you a ton of options for running around the board, and then also just setting up your artillery. Now let's talk about the artillery, right? So for a competitive list, lots of folks will talk to you about how a ton of blowpipe skinks are just a ludicrous thing to face down, and I couldn't agree more. They're just better built for their job than any other unit in the game. They do that extra bit of damage, right? Almost every cheap ranged unit has 1 damage on hit and 3 damage on crit, and these guys just get that 4th crit damage for, as far as I can tell, just no reason. Then they've also just got toughness 2 instead of 3, which shaves on their points. But they're archers, right? You don't want them in fights anyway. You want to be blowing your opponent off the board before they get to fight you. And even if they do fight you, you've got this bonus disengage ability that you have access to, which just makes them really hard to kill again. So spamming skinks, a whole bunch of them, is just really powerful. It makes it so there's nowhere to hide for your opponent's pieces, so that if it's a hunter-killer mission, you're going to be able to hit their guys, and they might not be able to hit yours. And then for objective missions, skinks have move 6, so there's really nothing to worry about there. So what do you want, to fill out a skink list? I've played, a solid amount with Seraphon, and I really think that the Saurus Knights are they're not a good unit on their own. They're sort of the best in the game at doing something that's generally not very valuable. So they're mobile at move 6, I believe. Yeah, and then they're actually really tanky for their points, right? Toughness 4, 20 wounds is, not blowing you out of the water, but for 115 points, that's actually really incredible survivability. And so what you want with skinks is you want something that can play the objectives and then not die when it gets there. That's all you want. And Saurus Knights do that. They do that better than the Ripperdactyl and Pterodon riders do. And all the rest of the Saurus are just really slow. So you're just going to move your Saurus forward, and then you're just blowing things off the board with your skinks, right? Your skinks are your damage, and then your Saurus just run to the objectives. The nice thing about the Scarvet on Cold One is that it can kind of do both. It can run to an objective, and then it can actually win the fight once it gets there, which is really important to just have access to in one spot in your warband. So this is how I would run it. You could drop a Saurus Knight for something else, but the math doesn't really work out to add more skinks that way. Now, we're actually going to have a similar list to this Sweet Casual list later in the video, but Slann Starmasters just function really well with the Stormcast Warrior Chamber. The ability Lords of Space and Time lets you teleport a unit to a spot within a number of inches equal to the ability, and it's perfect because the Slann Starmaster has reasonable mobility on its own. Actually, only move 4, but having the fly keyword lets it kind of get up onto things really easily, and then the way it can teleport, say another 3 inches on average, can put your really slow, beefy unit into position really nicely. And so the Decimator Prime, I think, is one of the absolute perfect pieces to do that with. The Decimator Prime is a Stormcast hero out of the Warrior Chamber. It just does a ton of damage. It's really hard to kill. It has range 2. It's just perfect. The only issue is that it has move 3. It's just uselessly slow on its own, but the Starmaster can just put it where it needs it. Then you're going to fill this out with Blowpipe Skinks, and then I think you still want a Salamander here. Now the reason is, this is a toolbox list, right? So your Starmaster, it all revolves around them, which is why I've put Lord Croak in the art here. So you're going to, use its ranged attack, this 3 attacks, 3s and 6s when it hits. That's a really good sort of bit of artillery right there, but it's not always going to be enough to take something out. So you can actually shoot something with the Starmaster and then just come teleport your Salamander here, so that next round, or next activation, you're just going to bombard it again with your Salamander. So I think that's a really nice combo to have access to. Finally, Saurus Warriors, they fit well with the math, and they're funny because they're completely overshadowed by skinks generally in Seraphon, but they're actually fairly respectable. There's a lot of warbands that would play 6 Saurus Warriors in all their lists if they had access to them. And we're back, though this is just one video, so you don't know that I had to take an hour-long break so my voice could recover. The Stormcast Warrior Chamber is really cool. I like them because of just the way their units are statted. They're all just beefy and do a good amount of damage. So, getting into it on a budget, I would get the Steelhearts, Steelhearts Liberators. They're the very first Underworlds warband, and you can still get them just as models. And then I would get a box of Gryph-hounds with them. And then if you run the Angarad Bright Shield and Severin Steelheart as heroes, and then Oberyn the Bold as just a Liberator with Grand Hammer, you have a really solid sort of high damage warband that gets bolstered by having 2 Gryph-hounds. Oops. And then if you want to jump into competitive with them, it is hard to do with Stormcast. Not going to lie there. They suffer for a lot of the things that are not rewarded in Warcry, right? Being really having high toughness, you pay a lot of points for it. It's just hard to put together. Warbands with high numbers are just rewarded in a lot of ways. But I do think that it's important to at least see if we can build around the most powerful units in the warband. So those are going to be the Prosecutor with Grandblade and the Judicator with Thunderbolt Crossbow. The Judicator with the crossbow, it has this sort of quote-unquote drawback that isn't a drawback, where instead of having a minimum range of 3, it has a minimum range of 6 instead. So it's easy for your opponents to sort of close with it and have it not be able to do much to them. However, it does significantly more damage than other similarly pointed ranged attacks, and I think that's really valuable. I think if you put it in one of your deployment groups like the Hammer or Dagger that doesn't come on right away. It's going to be able to just put out a ton of damage as soon as it comes onto the board, and they're going to have a really hard time closing with it in a meaningful way. You can also, you're not a robot, right? You can shoot at the thing that is going to try to close with you, and well, 2 activations with Adjudicator with Thunderbolt Crossbow is going to blow off the field. Any non-elite unit is just going to be gone after getting looked at by Adjudicator. Then the Prosecutor with Grandblade is really wonderful to have a move 10 flyer that can one-shot kill chaff units. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that that's the thing that I value most of all in elite units, is being able to one-shot kill chaff, and being able to fly around doing it is really valuable. Your Decimator Prime can also one-shot kill chaff. It's got movement 3, which is a big drawback, but at least the range 2 is mitigating that somewhat. You could also go with a, I believe it's called a Protector Prime. Yeah, Protector Prime. It's got the the range 3. It does a tiny bit less damage than the Decimator, but that range 3 means it's got a threat range of 6 inches, which is similar to a move 5 1-inch range unit. Obviously, the ability to sort of move twice to get anywhere you want on the board isn't there, but still really solid. And then the Gryph-hounds give you more mobility with that wonderful darting attack ability that they've got, so they can give themselves a bonus attack action, which is really valuable. So this is actually a list that can project power all across the board at all times, essentially. You've got a ton of mobility, and you've got this ranged unit that can really shoot things down. I do want to note, though, list building is kind of hard with this chamber. I made a ton of 1,005 point lists. There's just numbers like, you would love to be able to drop a Gryph-hound for, say, a Liberator with Grandblade or something, but it just doesn't work. Or, drop the Decimator Prime to have a cheaper hero and then something else, but it just doesn't work. So list building with Stormcast can be really difficult, but I do think that this one has the ability to project across the board and do a lot of damage and be hard to kill. It's lacking those numbers, which is its only flaw. You can make some really cool sweet casual lists, though. So I just showed you a Slann list in Seraphon that was just importing a single Stormcast. But you can also bring the Slann into Stormcast to have it a bunch of options of Stormcasts to move around. So Tempest Winds is the ability from the Knight Vexillor. And until the end of the battle round, add the value of this ability to the move characteristic of friendly fighters that start their activation within 12 inches. So between the Slann and the Knight Vexillor, you've got your 3 Liberators that have normally, absolutely no mobility, and there's only 3 of them. But the Knight and the Slann let you actually sort of fly around, teleport wherever you want. It's a really cool sort of other way of solving the mobility issue than, other than the competitive list I showed. And it's just a really nice combo that can make for some really cool, flavorful games that, have you sort of flying around the board with your little Liberators. I also want to note that, having a Protector Prime plus 5 Gryph-hounds is a list. I didn't want to highlight that as my primary competitive list because it doesn't really feel the same as, it doesn't feel like you're playing Stormcast, you're just playing Gryph-hounds, but that might actually be more powerful than the competitive list I showed. It's got some definite flaws with it just because Gryph-hounds are a really good unit, but the second Gryph-hound is a lot worse than the first Gryph-hound when you're building lists. Part of what makes them so powerful is that darting attack ability, which is a triple, so you're not really going to use that twice. So then, Gryph-hounds are still solid on their own. They're, move 6, respectable damage, not that easy to kill, but, a lot of that sort of game-breaking utility is gone when you just have a ton of them. So now we're getting into Stormcast Vanguard, and this is the powerful Stormcast. So I'd say the best way to get into them on a budget is to grab a box of Hurricane Raptors and also the Farstriders, which is a Underworld's warband. I think it was the second Stormcast one they put out. And it just has 3 Vanguard Hunters in it, which is great because then you just have those 3 and then 2 Hurricane Raptors and an Aetherwing. And so, your Hurricane Raptors are shooting all around the board. They do, solid damage. And then your Aetherwing can just go grab objectives. And then your Vanguard Hunters are just, solid fighty pieces that, they can win a fight if they need to, or they actually have this range attack, which helps mitigate how slow Stormcast are. So this is a pretty functional list for pretty cheap. I only give this list also because the Warcry box is sold out almost everywhere. But if you can pick one up, that's an even better option, just because you get 2 extra Vanguard Hunters for the same price. Now, competitive. There are a ton of different but very similar lists for running Stormcast Vanguard competitively. It's absolutely not fully solved. So I think the first thing that I would go with here is a Knight Venator with a Hurricane Raptor. Hurricane Raptors are probably your best Stormcast piece here. And then a Gryph-hound, and then 8 Aetherwings. I would say anything less than 6 Aetherwings is not competitive Stormcast Vanguard. I think you absolutely need a minimum of 6 of them. Aetherwings are the most powerful unit in the game. You can watch my top 8 featherweights video if you would like sort of a closer explanation of it, but just point blank, I would say Aetherwings are the best unit in the game. Just only costing 45 points, being able to fly wherever they want, and then, it's easy to dismiss their damage because 3 attacks, 2 toughness, or 2 strength, and then 1s and 2s for when they hit. 1 Aetherwing is not hurting anyone. 8 Aetherwings are hurting someone. 8 Aetherwings can actually win a fight if you, descend on an objective with all 8 of them in round 1, and then your opponent is slogging through that in round 2 to try to claim the objective. Those Aetherwings, they will eventually rack up hits, and they will eventually do real damage when there's a million of them. Now, you don't want to only have them because they're very killable at only 6 health. So your opponent can eventually slog through them, especially in a Catacombs game that will end at round 5 instead of round 3. Your opponent just has way more time to slog through Aetherwings. So you want a little bit more backbone. And this is where the Hurricane Raptor really helps, being able to project damage, shoot down the things that are going to be really good at killing Aetherwings. Your Gryph-hound is, again, like I said in the Stormcast Warrior Chamber video, the first Gryph-hound is a really powerful unit. The second one does fall off a little bit, and after that they fall off even more, but the first Gryph-hound is an excellent unit. And then the Knight Venator, now it's a very skill-intensive piece, the Knight Venator, because it doesn't do that much sort of point-for-point damage, but the ability to fly, move 10 around the board, be able to shoot 20 inches anywhere to the board, and then do really respectable damage, on those shots, or be able to do kind of reasonable for a unit. Well, it'd be really great damage for a unit half its points, but reasonable damage in melee if they do close with it. Just gives you all of these options all tied up into one piece. You can always put in a Hurricane Raptor Prime instead and run a 9th Aetherwing, but I do think that there's a bit diminishing returns to adding just one more Aetherwing, and so the upgrade from a Hurricane Raptor Prime to a Knight Venator here is solid, but there's a lot of slight variations to this. So you have options to absolutely spam Aetherwings all across the board. You can get up to 14 models pretty easily. You could do just 2 Hurricane Raptors and then all Aetherwings, or 1 Hurricane Raptor, 2 Gryph-hounds, and all Aetherwings. You can sort of mix and match to your heart's content. As long as you've got a lot of Aetherwings and then some kind of punch in there, you're going to be doing really well with Stormcast Vanguard. I legitimately think this is one of the most powerful warbands in the game. And they're good enough, and Aetherwings are good enough that even going casual and going really crazy with it can still give you a really functional warband. So I included this in one of my sort of janky combo lists videos back in the day, and it's a Lord Aquiller and a Cenari Cathalar, which is the barefooted woman with the sort of, I don't know, brazier or something, uh, sort of a torch situation. And she has the ability to reflect damage that has been dealt to a friend, in this case the Lord Aquiller, onto something else. So the Lord Aquiller is sort of your big head honcho for Vanguard, and it's the perfect piece to combo with her because it's got you know, really good 10-inch move, but then a ton of HP. So to take it down, they're going to have to do a ton of work, and um, it's fast enough to just shove right in their face and force them to fight it. So then they start fighting it, and then your Cathalar comes in and does the damage reflection ability, gets a ton of more damage off of it, and it can be onto something other than what the Aquiller is fighting. Which lets you sort of blow up a bunch of different things. A lot of the combos in the game that require, that give you like huge amounts of burst damage, a lot of them are just going to be onto one unit, and you won't always necessarily have the most control over what unit that is that you're doing damage onto. That's not true with this combo. Now, this combo does require you to set it up. It's pretty skill intensive in that way. Like you need to force your opponent into a situation where they're fighting who you want them to be fighting. But if you pull it off, you're going to have a great time. And then having 2 Gryph-hounds and 6 Aetherwings is going to be really nice to just give you a ton of objective flexibility when you aren't comboing. This is one of the very few casual lists that I would say that you could bring to a tournament and win some games and do some stuff with. So now on to the the wizardly Stormcast, the Sacrosanct, and they got some really cool new pieces with the Grand Alliance books. Now I know at this point this is old news, right? It was like 6 months ago, but still really fun to talk about. So getting it on a budget is just going to be the ETB Castigators and the ETB Sequitors. This might be the cheapest way to play the game, and it will give you a functional list. You've got that Gryph-hound. The Castigators have an ability that lets one Castigator do quite a bit of burst damage. Having 2 is still really nice because it just means they're harder to hide from, right? They can't just put their most important piece out of range of one of them because you've got 2 bubbles instead of 1. And then the Sequitor with Grand Hammer does very respectable damage for what it's costing, and then just wins fights. This is a pretty reliable warband. Again, you're going to have the classic Stormcast numbers issue with it, but that's okay. Now, if you're getting competitive, you're still going to have that numbers issue, but you just have way stronger tools to deal with it. So first, I would have the Castigator as Castigator Prime. Now, this piece, it's your only Castigator now, so you are going to need to choose, and it's going to be pretty skill testing, which one you do of the sort of burst damage from one shot, that's the ability they have, or the Cleanse the Realms of Taint ability, where if you take something down, you get to shoot again. So you're going to have to choose, do you want to get a lot of damage onto one thing with a legitimate fail rate there too, or do you want to finish something like maybe a lower value target off to then get another free attack? But a lot of options there for your Castigator Prime. And then the real exciting piece, the thing we're actually writing home about, is the Thundercats, right? The Evocator on Dracoline, specifically the one with Grand Stave, is a legitimately excellent sort of dragon piece, right? So it's got 10-inch move, but it doesn't have the mount keyword because Dracolines can climb terrain. And so you can kind of go anywhere with it and just put out a whole bunch of damage. And then, so, enough to comfortably one-shot kill chaff units. So that covers a lot of your issues with Stormcast, of how you get surrounded and then eventually sort of activated down. Because right from the first battle round, you can be chipping away at their numbers, making it harder for them to, out-activate you. Then you've also got your Gryph-hounds. Gryph-hounds are great. Run them around, do darting attacks, everything good. You are kind of low on Stormcast here, just 3 of them, but getting to 5 models, having a really huge, really mobile beatdown unit is really great. And then, again, the Sequitur with Grand Hammer, just really good at winning fights against, even against things that are generally a little more expensive than it. We can, though, get a little more casual, a little sillier, and run all 3 Thundercats from a, just one of those boxes has 3 of them. So if you have a box, you can just comfortably run all of them. If you outfit your Evocator Prime with a Grand Stave, do the one with the Grand Stave, and then just for fitting things in points-wise, just have one with Blade and Stave. The one with the Blade and Stave is almost as good. It just the tiniest sliver less damage, and then still has all the other positive aspects to it. These are just going to just run across the board, wrecking shop. You will still, often lose just because you only have 4 models in this warband, but you are going to feel like you're in the driver's seat of whatever game you're in. You might not win that game, but you are going to be in the driver's seat. You are going to be deciding the terms of engagement. Now, Sylvaneth. These are the ones that I've painted here. It's one of the only factions that I've painted to a high enough standard I'm willing to share. So they are kind of tough to do on a budget, right? So the Start Collecting box isn't the best Warcry entry point for them. It's good for Age of Sigmar, but not really for Warcry. You can do better just getting a box of Dryads and Yulthari's Guardians. That's the Underworld's warband. And that's going to be $70. You can get a Branch Nymph, a Tree Rev Scion, and then 2 Tree Revenants and 9 Dryads. That's a good way to do it. You can also hold out. So we'll probably know more actually just this Saturday, but the Broken Realms Kragnos, they've shown that they're dropping a new Sylvaneth model. I don't know if it'll get Warcry rules, but it might. They'll have a value box for it. They've had value boxes for every included faction for all the other Broken Realms books, and there's a really solid chance that that value box just has a better array of units for a cheaper price than what you're used to with Sylvaneth. So I would hold out for that if you don't have Sylvaneth and you're wanting to get into them on a budget. But if it doesn't end up being a great Warcry box, definitely just grab a box of Dryads and the Yulthari's Guardians Underworld's warband. If we're going to go with competitive, I created a guide to Sylvaneth that I'm really happy with that happened before the before the Grand Alliance books, and you can absolutely go with the competitive sort of combining everything together list from that video, and that'll work great. But I do think that the Arch Revenant gives you enough options that I would probably lean towards it in a competitive list now. So that would be an Arch Revenant, and then a Kurnoth Huntmaster with Scythe. I get more into it into the Sylvaneth guide video, but it's just an incredible board control piece that is absolutely worth having. And then a ton of Revenants in this case. I actually really like Dryads, but they don't play really well with the Arch Revenant because you really want to be using that Arch Revenant triple, and that just does the same thing that the Dryad triple does, except the Dryad triple only works with other Dryads. So if you're going to have an Arch Revenant in your list, it doesn't really make sense to base your list around Dryads really at all. So I've cut them all, and we're just going with Revenants, 3 Spite Revenants because they're just an excellent point-for-point damage piece. They are a little bit made of glass, but that's okay because you're really wanting to try to force your opponent to fight your Kurnoth Huntmaster here, and then your Revenants are just in support. And then 6 Tree Revenants. So they're not the most impressive units, but what is impressive is only costing 50. Only costing 50 points lets you put a ton of really powerful things in your list, right? We have 2 huge beatdown pieces in our list. One sort of flying utility piece, and then one just squat him where the most important spot on the board is and just let him control that place. And so that would normally make you really at risk for low numbers, but the Tree Revenants say, we don't care, we'll just gum up the board for you. Move 4 isn't very impressive until all of a sudden there's 6 of us for only 300 points. And so this warband has 11 units in it, putting out lots of great sources of damage with your Spite Revenants and your Kurnoth Huntmaster, and then putting out a ton of utility with your ability to, lock something down with a Spite Revenant ability, the Shrieking Terror ability for a double, or teleporting with your Tree Revenants, right? So that makes, the first Tree Revenant obviously much more valuable than the other 5, but, at that point you're a threat to teleport any of them, any which way. So just a really solid, flexible list there that can, requires you to buy a lot of Revenants, but otherwise gives you just a ton of options. As far as a sweet casual list, you can get 4 Kurnoth Hunters into a list here. Kurnoth Hunters are, basically just Stormcasts, right? They're these big, tough pieces that win their fights, but normally you would have this problem of, just having 4 of them in your list doesn't give you a lot of other options. Luckily, Tree Revenants let you actually have 8 models in your warband while you're doing this. So you can have a much more functional warband where you're also just all in on these huge range 2 pieces. The one with sword is range 1, but it's still a really great, beat down piece. You can have a ton of fun with this, and you'll still feel like you're playing Warcry because you won't just be down to 4 models. There's, though, just so many really cool ways to play this warband. I just love that, if you don't choose an Arch Revenant, all of their abilities mesh together so that you can have a little bit of everything in the same list. They're one of the only warbands where it really does make sense to have one of everything in the list. That sort of beautiful machine list, I'll just put one here just on the side here, but it is just a notch below the competitive list and one notch above this big trees list, but it's an absolute joy to play, honestly. This is one of my favorite warbands to play, probably just behind Khorne Demons as my favorite. Wow. So that's it. That's all the warbands in the game. 3 lists for each of them, except for just a couple. If you have gotten this far, please do drop a like down. It's sort of our offering to the chaos god of algorithms, Algorithmo. It helps people find these videos. The algorithm takes how many likes you've gotten. That's how people find it. I would love this to be sort of a resource that, lots of people can see. So share this. This is, this project has been probably, of all the things I've done on the channel, the thing I'm most proud of. So, let me know if this has helped you at all. And I will be doing some follow-up videos to this. I'll eventually rank all these lists. I guess you could call it a tier list. I don't want to be on Rito's corner for that, but I do just want to sort of file these into which ones are, in which sorts of situations competitively. And then, we'll see how that goes. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.